Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have constitutional law professor John Michaels back with us again. We'll chat with him in just a second. But first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening. And we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media. And we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe. And you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So let's get right into the one big thing of the week. And that's what's going on in Los Angeles with the protest against ICE and the government's rounding up of undocumented immigrants and Donald Trump's federalization of the California National Guard without the request and consent of Governor Gavin Newsom and his deployment of 700 U.S. Marines. Newsom and the state's attorney general filed suit. What happened yesterday was that the district court, a federal judge, said, nope, control of the National Guard has to go back to the governor. Trump immediately appealed to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and in a very late ruling last night, put a pause on that order, which means that instead of the Guard being put back in the control of Gavin Newsom at noon today, there's a 4-day pause at the Ninth Circuit, giving all sides a chance to state their case, give the court a chance to review the circumstances, and make a ruling. So the question is, on the 17th, when that hearing takes place, who's getting control of the Guard? What do you think the court's going to do on the 17th?
Well, I'd like to think that we can take a beat and we can go back to a time where we can wake up in the morning and not feel that awful dread in the pit of our stomach that democracy is over. So what I'd really like to see happen is I'd love to see Gavin Newsom get state sovereignty.
Yeah, well, the reality is this case is going to the Supreme Court regardless. If on the 17th or shortly thereafter, because the court seemed to be acting very quickly given the circumstances, if the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals says National Guard control goes back to Newsom, Trump's going to appeal immediately to the Supreme Court. If the opposite occurs, Newsom and the Attorney General will file an appeal as well. Interestingly, though, this case, the name of this case is Gavin Newsom versus Donald Trump.
Well, that's what is happening.
It's just no, but when you think about it in those terms, it's David and Goliath. It's good versus evil. Newsom versus Trump. I think that's a good thing for Gavin Newsom.
Sure.
And we'll talk about that in a second, but it'll be interesting to see what happens. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals is typically a left-leaning court of appeals. Trump and Republicans for years have attacked that court as being, lefty. Last night, Donald Trump posted, "Thank you" to the court. So, which is so on brand. When a court or anybody does anything that he likes, they're good. If they don't do something he likes, then they're corrupted, they're evil, whatever. It's so childish. So then you have Gavin Newsom. You have an interesting thing that's occurring here, which is Democrats for the last year or so have been saying, we don't have a leader. We don't have someone who's fighting for us. We don't have that star in the party. He's always been looked at as a potential star. Now, to be perfectly honest, and this is the way things work, he's tall. He's got great hair. He's a good-looking guy. He's articulate.
Good teeth. Don't forget about the teeth.
He's funny. He's smart. And he's ballsy. Those are great qualifications for a presidential candidate. And so what's happening is there's a moment that's been created here by Trump.
Yeah.
And a gift that's been given to Newsom by Trump. And Newsom is really meeting this moment. He has become the leader of the Democratic Party. He is the face of the fight against Donald Trump. Tuesday night, he did like a 6 o'clock address. He had the flag behind. I mean, he looked like the fucking president. And I was there for it. He is certainly the right guy at the right time to be fighting this battle.
I mean, he runs the the world's fourth largest economy.
Yeah.
He's been dealing with Border Patrol in a very aggressive way. I mean, he is ballsy. I'm with you. This showdown could be interesting. It also would be great if Trump could also just take a beat, enjoy his King's Day, and just, maybe his birthday, and like give himself a little pat on the back and just, step the fuck down. Any chance do you think that's going to happen?
No. To your point, this is Kim Trump-un weekend. This is where he gets to sit there like the strong man he thinks he is and fold his arms and nod like Mussolini as the tanks roll down Pennsylvania Avenue, and he thinks he's living in an autocratic state, which he's not. He's like a little kid. He's playing army. That's what he's doing. He's playing army. I did it when I was 8. What's his excuse? He's 80, fuck's sake. And so he'll have his fun birthday weekend. According to the experts, the tanks are probably going to be literally ripping up the pavement on the streets. Like, no one thought of that. Like,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Like the damage that 8 billion tanks are going to cause to the streets of D.C.
Well, there's no limit to the debt ceiling. That's just a figment of your imagination.
But back to Newsom, before the pause was hit by the Ninth Circuit, he was able to stand there and look at the American public, and he did it, and say, I won. We won. Democracy won. If he is going to be successful in this case, when it gets to the Supreme Court, and if he succeeds, that's like fucking Rocky, man. That is Hollywood. And that is some currency that he's going to be able to spend as the next 2 years play out in the presidential campaign. The other thing about the presidential campaign of 28 that's really starting to annoy the fuck out of me is, where are the other contenders? Where are the other governors? Where are their press conferences? Where's J.B. Pritzker? Where's Gretchen Whitmer? Where's Wes Moore? Where's Josh Shapiro? Where are all these people? Where are they on television going, we stand with Gavin Newsom? And Trump, you want to bring that fight to my state? Bring it. Where is that?
Well,
address the nation.
I think that's an excellent point. And instead, what you're seeing sheriffs in Florida saying, hey, protesters, we will not hesitate to shoot you, kill you. If you get out of line, just be prepared. This isn't California. I mean, it's an excellent point you bring up.
And look, I tweeted the other night, I'm going to remember this in 2028 when the primary comes around. I will not vote for any candidate who did not very aggressively, very publicly stand up and stand with Gavin Newsom right now, because he is the one guy that's being hung out to dry to fight Donald Trump and his tyranny and his autocratic fantasies for California and every other state in this country. And so if he's running and others are running, I'm voting for him. I'm saying it right now because, one of the reasons why I'm saying that, Jen?
Why?
Is because without his fight right now, we might not have an election in 28. So I'm not going to let them benefit by I'm not going to say they're complicit, but their silence. And there are those in this world who think silence is complicity. And so I want to see them step up. I want to see a 6 o'clock national address by J.B. Pritzker and Gretchen Whitmer and Shapiro and Wes Moore and anybody else who expects to get my vote or anybody else's vote 2 years from now. Because when the shit hit the fan and there were literally U.S. troops in the streets of America ready to turn on our own citizens, the only face I see fighting that is Gavin Newsom's.
Yeah, I have a feeling that you may see those faces on Saturday. Because shit's going to get crazy on Saturday. I really think you're going to see governors come out. I really do.
I hope. The other thing that we should talk about in this context is yesterday, the senior senator from California, Alex Padilla, went to a press conference held by DHS. It was Kristi Noem at the podium, and Padilla walked in and attempted to ask a question, almost immediately identified himself as a U.S. senator, and was wrestled to the ground by FBI, by federal agents, handcuffed and forcibly removed from the room. A U.S. senator. The video of it.
Horrifying, Andy. Horrifying.
Like we are living in Russia.
Yes.
That's what that video looks like. Now, she then came out immediately, did a press conference, which is her tell. When she does a press conference to deny something, like Trump, it means it's true. He didn't identify himself. He wasn't wearing his pin. He had a jacket or something that said U.S. Senate on it. Okay, like, but he was. We see the video. He's going, "I'm a senator. I'm a senator."
Say, we can hear it. We can see it. There's evidence.
He's 5 feet away from her, being wrestled. I'm a senator. At that point. Oh, hey, stop. Hey, I'm Kristi Noem, and this is my. And that man is a senator. Stop. Let him. That's all she had to do.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
She stood there and watched, kept talking. As a U.S. senator, was wrestled to the ground like a fucking criminal and escorted forcibly out of the building. A U.S. senator. Now, if that can happen to a U.S. senator, what do you think can happen to you or I, Jen?
This is why I don't sleep at night.
Ambien. I keep telling you, take Ambien. Smoke a lot of weed. Do something. You could sleep if you want to. You could sleep.
I think we should do an experiment on the show. What would we be like high doing this?
So hits from the bong. Remember that song?
No.
It's such a great song. All right, let's get to our winners and losers.
My winner, Governor Newsom, for standing up for all of his constituents, the Constitution, and his state sovereignty. My loser, the law-abiding, undocumented Americans who have been here for decades, paying into a system they cannot access, not to mention that these folks are disappearing at alarming rates and have no recourse or rights.
I got 2 winners. First one is Gavin Newsom, who is now officially the leader of the Democratic Party and the one to beat in 28. My other winner, Massachusetts Representative Stephen Lynch, who called Trump and ICE Nazis during the GOP Oversight Committee's hearing yesterday on sanctuary city policies. And we're going to play this clip.
Trump is a wannabe gangster, and he's showing the world what he's about. And I'm proud. You know, my dad served in Second World War. He fought the Nazis in Northern Africa. He fought the Nazis on the Italian peninsula. And I think he's looking down right now, and he's happy that I'm fighting today's Nazis. He's proud of that.
And that gets us to the Weekly Rant. Earlier this week, we posted my interview with CNN's Jake Tapper, who, along with reporter Alex Thompson, is the co-author of the new book, Original Sin, which is a scathing account of former President Joe Biden's mental and physical diminishment, and what the authors allege was the cover-up to keep the severity of that situation away from the American public. The book is a huge financial success. It's received great reviews, and it's the most talked about book in the country. But Tapper has been hammered by both the left and the right. Republicans accuse him of being a part of the cover-up he writes about, while Democrats are angry over what they believe is yet another example of a journalist withholding critical reporting and saving it for a future book deal. They're also upset because they believe Donald Trump is 1,000 times worse than Biden on his worst day. So why bring up the past when there's currently a dangerous, democracy-raping sociopath criminal in the White House? Well, here's the simple answer. What happened in the White House from 2020 to 2024 is part of America's history, and it's important that history is documented for future generations. But here's the most important point. Documenting past history and aggressively covering Trump are not mutually exclusive. We can and must do both. But that's not what the liberal/progressive tribe believes. And the tribe reared its ugly head this week when I promoted the Tapper episode on my social media. I became the target of the insults and personal attacks, ranging from disappointing to, dude, shut the fuck up, and unfollowing. Well, guess what? I'm not in a cult. I don't like when people on the right are closed-minded, toxic tribalists, and I don't like when Democrats act the same way. And I'm not a hypocrite. I'm not going to righteously criticize Trump and MAGA and conservatives for their unethical, immoral, and/or illegal behavior, and then play stupid or justify it when it's Democrats. I actually believe in right and wrong, not right and left. I don't have two sets of values, but apparently a lot of folks on the left do. As for Tapper and others in the news biz, it's actually the job of journalists and writers and authors to expose the truth, and we should be thankful for what they do, even when that truth is painful and not what we want to hear. A free and open press is the bedrock of our democracy, and I long for the day when facts, truth, and reality aren't partisan, when there'll be no sides when it comes to news and reporting. So until then, I hear there's a cult that blindly accepts everything Dear Leader says, and where you can turn your brain off, kill your intellectual curiosity and critical thinking, and just be a really good, loyal, Kool-Aid drinking tribesman. Maybe you'll like it better over there. Good luck. All right, let's get to John Michaels. He is a UCLA professor of law specializing in constitutional and national security law. His award-winning scholarship has appeared in the Yale Law Journal, University of Chicago Law Review, and Harvard Law Review. And he has written popular essays for the New York Times, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, Foreign Affairs, and Guardian. A Yale Law graduate and Supreme Court clerk, he is a member of the American Law Institute and serves on the advisory board of UCLA's Safeguarding Democracy Project. His latest book, co-written with David Knoll, is Vigilante Nation: How State-Sponsored Terror Threatens Our Democracy. John, welcome back into the back room.
Thanks for having me back.
So let's start with the craziness taking place out in Los Angeles. President Trump has cited a section of Title 10 of the U.S. Code, which is a federal law, which he claims allows him to call in a state's National Guard if there's, quote, danger of a rebellion against the government. He's federalized the Guard without the request or consent of Governor Gavin Newsom, and he's also sent in 700 U.S. Marines. What does the Constitution say about all this? Are his actions legal? Are they constitutional?
Yeah, so the Constitution gives the president capacious authority. So where we really want to look is to statutory law. And so Congress put in place a long time ago a statute known as the Posse Comitatus Act. And that essentially restricts the use of troops on American soil. And there's kind of a sordid back history to it. But the basic understanding is that I think has relevance today is that, look, we kind of have an unspoken contract with the government. And we have the biggest, most powerful military in the world. And one way we can kind of make peace with that, to the extent one does, is to know that they're not going to be used against us. Right? They're only supposed to be defend our borders and project force outward. Okay. And whatever you think about that, at least we know at home, they're not going to be turned against us. And if that weren't the case, we might strike a different bargain in terms of, how we pay for the military, what kind of tolerance we would have for a large, military, where they'd be barracked, like, for instance, really close to LA, if you think about Camp Pendleton, which is where the Marines are housed. So I think we want to start there. So after the Civil War, we could talk about the sordid history of that if you'd like, but after the Civil War, Congress passed a law that essentially limited the use of federal troops on U.S. soil. And there are three provisions under which that could be superseded. One is the threat of actual or threatened foreign invasion. One is the rebellion provision that you addressed. And the third is whether the president feels unable to be able to execute the laws of the United States using regular police and civilian authorities. Mm-hmm. And so that gives the president a whole lot of discretion. And that's kind of where I think we are right now in this moment. Is the president able to say that with essentially a straight face? And who's going to be able to challenge that? Would the courts challenge it? Probably not. And that's why we're in this moment that's sort of a legal standoff and sort of a political standoff between the governor of California and the president of the United States.
So there's this lawsuit that Gavin Newsom and the California Attorney General filed. Initially, they wanted a TRO, a temporary restraining order, to stop the deployment of troops. That was denied pending a hearing, I believe, this afternoon. It's happening up in San Francisco, I believe. I'm in New York, so we're taping this around 3:30 East Coast time. I guess my question is, you said with a straight face, how do they go into that hearing and say, because there's a few hundred people in a 5-block radius, most of whom are peaceful, because of that, we need to send in the troops? And how does that not get struck down in court?
Yeah, we just don't have a history of judges telling the president that to calm down in these types of circumstances.
That's
So we
true,
don't
right?
have a lot of data on this because this is such a rare move. But generally speaking, when the president is conferred discretion over matters of national security, the courts are going to be reluctant to step in. Again, different times, different
Mhm.
president, maybe we start seeing a shift. But if we're going to look to the kind of patterns of judges and also the kind of psychology that drives a lot of judges to not want to weigh in, not just on a political standoff between the governor of the largest state and the president, but also just what are the facts? How would we even be able to determine? You and I can talk about, this is not a rebellion. There's not a threat of rebellion. But, a
Mhm.
judge has to kind of show their work in a different way. And I think they're going to be reluctant to do so. The reason why I said with a straight face is because, this is a president who also is not very disciplined, to say the least.
Mhm.
And so if the president sent out a tweet or a text or and some kind of missive that basically said, I'm doing this to you know, to ruin Newsom's career. I'm doing this because I hate Los Angeles and I hate sanctuary policies or I hate transgender students playing high school sports or whatever. Well,
Mhm.
then that's the smoking gun of a pretext where the president has made clear that he doesn't believe that there's actually some kind of threat or imminent threat to the United States, or that the ICE officials can't carry out their duties. So that's always, with this president, kind of lurking in the background is the lack of kind of discipline and circumspection.
Do you think we end up with this case in a similar place that we did with his invocation of the Alien Enemies Act, where the court said, sure, you can invoke that, but
Yeah.
the refugees still need their due process? In this case, could they say, sure, you want to deploy the National Guard? Go ahead. You want to deploy the Marines? Go ahead. But they can't actually do anything in terms of law enforcement until the governor and the mayor says, help, we need help.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a scenario that plays out?
That's a really nice point. I don't know if they'll do that. And I think there's a claim that the government would turn around and say, well, they're not doing any of that type of work. They're just there to make sure that things don't get out of hand. And then it kind of gets messy, like who's doing the arresting, who's doing the surveilling, like the kind of shift of responsibilities. But if they were to issue a declaration of that sort, I think it would put the federal government kind of on their back heels to figure out exactly how we structure that. But again, I don't think Trump cares about the niceties. I think
Mm-hmm.
he'd say, let's do it, and we'll worry about some kind of lawsuit later on. The effect will happen.
Yeah.
And then we'll scramble and maybe we'll comply or maybe we'll let some of them go if that's the case. Kind of like it's kind of a metaphor for the whole rounding up people and knowing that they're probably going to scoop up some U.S. citizens. And then they'll deal with the families being displaced, the disasters, the psychological trauma, the economic loss, the physical toll it's taking. They'll either deal with it or they'll just leave that for the people to kind of pick up their lives and try to stumble forward.
So the next tool in his belt is the Insurrection Act. So if he gets a ruling he doesn't like on posse comitatus, he can go to that. But do you think playing this out, it would seem he has even less grounds for something like that?
Yeah, I think there's again, it's the statutory language is capacious. So the president does have a lot of discretion there. And there is even some question about maybe this lawsuit is going to push him into the insurrection zone. And with that opens up the floodgate of even more kind of dangerous federal interventions. Mobilizing troops again on the southern border like he did at the end of his first presidency. So I do think there's the possibility that the president essentially calls the state's bluff or whomever and says, fine, you want to call it an insurrection? We didn't want to go there, but now it's an insurrection and your lives are going to be even more compromised as a result.
And wouldn't there be another lawsuit on that? And then they got to go
Yeah.
into court and defend what the insurrection means and looks like, and whether or not that's actually taking place out there, which everyone knows it isn't. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. My knowledge of the Constitution is limited like other laymen, but it just seems like this is just all bullshit. And one would hope that the courts, like they have in almost every single case that has been filed against him, that they will do the right thing, especially when it's so obvious what's on the line here, what the stakes are. And that is his desire to dismantle democracy. And, I mean, we have crime in this country. We have murders in this country. We have really bad things. We have riots, but that's also why we have local and state, police. There are states' rights. And doesn't it have to go through the governors? What is it's either the Constitution or is it the Posse Comitatus Act, where he has discretion, but it still has to be approved by the governors, no?
So the statute doesn't require the governor's consent. It's almost always the case that the president works in conjunction with the governor in these matters. The only time that has not been the case is when there's been essentially a massive civil rights standoff during the dying days of Jim Crow, when the governor of Arkansas and then later the governor of Alabama was absolutely refusing to follow federal judicial orders, saying you have to integrate.
In that case, it was in defense of the rights of Americans. In Trump's case, he's using the military against the rights of Americans. It's just hard to fathom how the courts wouldn't be all over this, but
yeah, I want to circle back to the courts in a second, but the challenge here, and I'm not sympathetic to this point, but the challenge here is that what the administration will say is, just as the Eisenhower and Kennedy and Johnson administrations were enforcing federal law, so too are we enforcing the federal immigration law. And they don't. There's to the extent you want to draw distinctions of the sort that you and I are drawing, it's just because of your political biases and the kind of the cultural and normative commitments that you have. But we're just enforcing federal law, and we have to do it to the best of our ability. And it's too bad that Democrats in California or Democrats in Illinois or Democrats in New York don't take it seriously, but we take federal law seriously. So their response to the point, like, this is the complete inversion. You're gaslighting the civil rights movement, all the stuff that emotionally we're channeling right now, and I think properly channeling. As an analytical matter, they would parry by saying you're just playing partisan politics. But Andy, I want to go back to your point about the courts, if I may, because it's a powerful one, and it's both powering and disempowering, because what you're saying is surely the courts should be able to do something here. Surely this is what they do. And they've done it in a lot of other contexts in which we've kind of looked to the courts as our last, hope. And they've stepped up. Why won't they step up here? And I think I'm going to default again to the position that courts are extremely nervous about telling the federal government what is and what isn't, anything from an act of war to an invasion to any of the sorts of responsibilities that turn on judgments of the safety and security of our nation. This is a little different, again, because it's like, well, is this really, a matter of national security, or is this about kind of a local problem that others are portraying as a matter of national security, simply to get in that kind of safe harbor that the courts won't touch? And that's the kind of moment of truth. Are the courts going to try to pull back and say, no, we're not going to let this become a national security issue? Go exactly along the lines that you're hoping and kind of projecting? Or are they going to say we have to stick within our normal ambit of responsibilities? I'm going to add one more, and I'm sorry for being long-winded, one more
No, go ahead.
challenge in
Very
this
insightful.
space, which kind of is that the courts also are very mindful of the fact that this is the first time in a long time where it's not clear that if they issue an order, the federal government's going to follow it. So they have to be quite strategic about how far they push an administration, because there's something to the federal courts about being a little bit like the wizard behind the curtain, because they speak with this grand voice and everyone follows 99.9% of the time their directives. But at the end of the day, they don't really have anything backing them except institutional credibility. And so if the president's like, you know what? I don't care. I don't care what happens at the proceedings in San Francisco. Maybe I'll just switch legal arguments and go the route you suggested, which is to say, fine, it's an insurrection then. Or maybe I'll just say, you know what? I already federalized the National Guard. Not much you can do about this. We'll resolve this in the midterm elections.
Yeah, it's pretty chilling to think that the courts would, like law firms and universities, some law firms, would bend the knee in advance because they're afraid to do the right thing because he may not obey it. I mean, that's kind of a
that's
strange
kind of
place
where
to
we
be
are.
Yeah,
and then
sure.
there's the added factor, which is there's been a lot of reports about judges being actually afraid for their personal safety and their family safety, and they're not confident the U.S. Marshals are going to do what needs to be done to protect them, because the Marshals are under the auspices of the Justice Department. And if they're saying these things, and and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post are reporting on it, it's not just idle chatter. They're clearly trying to send a message to the country that things are getting out of hand.
Well, things are really getting out of hand. I mean, Trump has actually suggested Gavin Newsom should be arrested.
Yep.
Speaker Mike Johnson, who is next in line for the presidency after J.D. Vance, said Newsom should be, quote, tarred and feathered. And just today, almost breaking news, California Senator Alex Padilla was handcuffed and forcibly removed from a DHS press conference. It just seems like a gross understatement to say we are in uncharted territory here.
Yeah.
And to your point earlier about, the partisan aspect of this, sure, some people, I guess, put a lot of things through a partisan lens. I don't, because I have no problem saying, look, you want to send the National Guard? You want to send troops because you think ICE can't get detainees into the detention center? I'm all for that. But the doomsday scenario of Marines start shooting American citizens who are just protesting, and don't forget, he wanted to shoot them in Lafayette Square with rubber bullets. And General Mark Milley said, no, we're not doing that. I don't know. I'm hoping there's a similar Mark Milley person out there in the military who would say, no, we're not giving that order. But that's where you draw the line. And that's where I think I can't fathom how the courts would give him that leeway. Although, to your point, the Supreme Court said he has unconditional immunity. So there you go, right?
Yeah. What one point to your comment about, is there a General Milley still around? And that's a big question. And one possibility, one sliver of hope, is that the president is moving too fast. So he's getting ahead of the personnel changes. And, if we're having this conversation in 3 or 4 years, perhaps the senior leadership, in at least, not with the National Guard, but at least with, armed services, that there's enough of a personnel purge / turnover / purity test or loyalty test that this conversation feels very different in 2027 than now. I'm not sure he has all the personnel in place to just basically run wild with his various threats, like if you spit, we'll shoot, or whatever kind of sloganeering that's coming out. I don't think it's fair to put the military in this position. I don't think it's fair to put the National Guard. So I want to give just a note about that as well, is that a lot of those folks signed up for, especially National Guards people, to maybe be deployed overseas, but most likely to help out in wildfires, to help out with, in California, it's different issues than, say, in hurricane land, where we know what they do during flooding and we know what they do after hurricane. But there's a lot of work, a lot of kind of honorable work with the National Guard, and with obviously the U.S. military as well. And to be told to now be standing on street corners with machine guns and looking at your fellow citizens as enemies, as hostile targets, puts them in not just an unenviable, but arguably an unconscionable position. So I want to be clear about kind of, acknowledging that what the president is not just doing to us, what the president is not just doing to suspected undocumented people or people, people of color who might look like they're not, true Americans, and I'm using scare quotes for your listeners, but also the personnel that he's being asked to do, what we think flies in the face of humanity and rationality.
Well, that's a really interesting point that you're raising, because we often find out about this kind of thing after the fact. We learned years ago that back in the Nixon days, because of his drinking and erratic behavior, that the military, the Joint Chiefs, got together and said, look, if there's an order, it's got to come through us before anything happens. His finger on the button, there is no button. We are the button. Right. And then we learned through Mark Milley and others that the same thing happened in Trump 1.0, that they had kind of a pact that they weren't going to let him go nuts. I don't think the Joint Chiefs would go on, CNN and go, hey, don't worry, folks, we got this covered. If anything stupid happens, we're not giving those orders. But it makes one wonder if they are, in fact, having those kinds of discussions again by saying, look, if people are attacking the federal buildings, if they're attacking ICE, whatever, we'll do what we have to do if we get the orders. But we're not shooting American citizens for protesting. This isn't about Trump's wet dream of squashing dissent. We're not going to support that. We still believe in the Constitution and why we took the oath and why we enlisted. So we'll never know until we kind of know, right? Because that's the way it's been.
Yeah, and that's, again, the hope that right now the personnel turnover hasn't been complete. And so we hope there's still some Milley disciples or Milley Confederates still kind of, helming those positions of authority and doing so quietly in the ways you suggest. I mean, in 2020, it got so bad that they were channeling directly to China. And these were reports that Pelosi and Milley were channeling directly to China and said, things are, really unstable here around, attending to the election and election disputes, but there is no reason for you to get, itchy on your own trigger finger. We're basically, boxing in the president. And I don't think, like you said, I don't think they're going to say it again. And, it doesn't need to be said to Gavin Newsom the same way it has to be said to the leadership in Beijing. But there is a hope that the president, again, is getting too far ahead of himself and his personnel.
Yeah. Are we in a constitutional crisis?
Yes. Yes. I mean, I think we were in a constitutional crisis before this weekend. I think the constant threats to states, the withholding funding, unless you do essentially a favor for me, which is whatever, change policy that doesn't necessarily need to be changed. Like, we're going to give you wildfire relief if you abandon sanctuary status cities. We'll give you funding for schools if you abandon transgender rights. All of this stuff is very much analogous to the perfect call that Donald Trump made to Volodymyr Zelensky, which motivated his first impeachment and arguably helped accelerate or precipitate the conflict that now is years and years into a massive tragedy in Europe. I think everything the president does in these regards is rather reckless and in complete disregard for the laws and norms of this country. So, yes, is the short answer.
Well, the Trump reality show continues. John, thanks for the insights, and let's chat again soon.
Thank you.
All righty. Take care. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Matty Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Lengyel. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.